Welcome viewers. Our top focus at this hour. A big admission has now been made by the Canadian government. A Canadian government report on terror financing and money laundering has now made some startling revelations. As per a report titled 2025 Assessment of Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Risks in Canada, Babbar Khalsa International and the International Sikh Youth Federation are among the Khalistani groups that have received funding from Canada as per the assessment of Canadian law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Now, this report also highlights the misuse of charitable and NPO sectors by Khalistani violent extremists in Canada. In fact, the report also states that these groups solicit donations from diaspora communities as well. Now, in this report, the government report in fact acknowledges that Khalistani extremist groups are resorting to violent means to establish an independent state within India's Punjab. So clearly shocking revelations coming to light from this report that has now been published. Remember, in this report, Babbar Khalsa International and the International Sikh Youth Federation are among the Khalistani groups that have received funding from Canada as per assessment of Canadian law enforcement and intelligence agencies. This is what the report mentions. Remember, the report is titled 2025 Assessment of Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Risks in Canada. Now viewers, this report also highlights the misuse of charitable and NPO sectors by Khalistani violent extremists in Canada. Further, the report states that these groups solicited donations from diaspora communities as well. In fact, the government report acknowledges that the Khalistani extremist groups are resorting to violent means, and this is to establish an independent state within India's Punjab. Remember, the Khalistani issue has been a point of contention between India and Canada. We had the ties between the two countries nosediving earlier as well. In fact, New Delhi has been raising these concerns with Canada, and now this report coming to light is showing how the groups and their terror funding network continues to operate in Canada. Now remember, a Canadian government report on terror financing and money laundering has made some startling revelations. This report is titled 2025 Assessment of Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Risks in Canada. And in this report, Babbar Khalsa International and the International Sikh Youth Federation, they are mentioned as among the Khalistani groups that have received funding from Canada. And this is according to the assessment of none other than but Canadian law and enforcement agencies. Remember, this very report also highlights how the charitable and the NPO sectors have been misused by Khalistani violent extremists in Canada. It also states that these groups solicit a donation from diaspora communities as well. So, in this report, we are trying to understand what the financial trail has been for these extremist communities, in fact, and this is what the report also exposes. Now, the government report acknowledges that the Khalistani extremist groups are resorting to violent means to establish an independent state within India's Punjab, so also highlighting the separatist aims of these groups in the report. In fact, India's name has also been referenced. It's a big admission that has now come in from the Canadian government. It's a report that talks about terror financing and money laundering, and now it has made some startling revelations. Remember, this report is titled 2025 Assessment of Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Risks in Canada. And in this report, Babbar Khalsa International and the International Sikh Youth Federation, these groups are mentioned as among the Khalistani groups that have received funding from Canada. And this is according to the assessment of Canadian law and enforcement agencies. Remember, this is something that New Delhi has been raising concerns about with Canada. In fact, this was the very issue that caused the ties between the two countries to nosedive last year. A lot of actions were taken, tit-for-tat measures in terms of diplomatic showdown, in fact. And now this report coming to light are making some startling revelations. Now, my colleague Brijesh Pandey is joining me on the broadcast for this story. Brijesh, New Delhi has been saying this all along that, there are groups in Canada that kind of receive support from, implicit and explicit support from different authorities. And now this report also exposing the same links. Walk us through the details of this report.
Well, I think, this report clearly exposes the duplicitous stand of the Canadian government vis-a-vis Indian growing concern about how Khalistani extremists were not only, taking shelter in Canada, but they were also thriving with the full connivity of the authority. They were misusing the systems that were there put in place. And what is more, shocking or disappointing, I would say, for the Indian government was that despite its repeated proofs, which they shared with the Canadian government, when Justin Trudeau was the Prime Minister of Canada, the situation, the relationship between India and Canada deteriorated to a level where I think it will take a while before the situation gets back to normal. This also shows, one more thing, Ishita, is about the kind of duplicitous stand the Western world takes vis-a-vis the real terror concern or the real extremist concern India or any other nation has vis-a-vis people who are not only living there in Canada, but also, they are enjoying state privileges and the authorities not doing any kind of crackdown. This makes their stand on terror or extremism highly, double standard. And this is the reason why this particular report exposes something which Indian government has been saying for a very long time. And I think the time has come for the Canadian government to wake up and smell the coffee. Time has come for them to crack down on these extremists and take into consideration the real, genuine concerns as far as Indian government is concerned. Ishita?
Right, Brijesh. It clearly highlights that differentiation that Western countries are, making about my terrorists and your terrorists, specifically when it comes to India. Now, in this report, Brijesh, they also mentioned two groups, Babbar Khalsa International and also the International Sikh Youth Federation. Help us understand how these two groups have been fundamental in putting and pushing these extremist agenda.
Well, Babbar Khalsa International is a very long, is an organization which is there for very long in circulation. They were, promoting extremism in the state of Punjab, but they were also, protesting against Indian government stand and their sensibilities vis-a-vis the state of Punjab. And in the outer world, there were several demonstrations which these organizations held as far as, Indian embassies are concerned, be it Vancouver, be it Canada, be it United Kingdom, and they were completely inimical to the interest of the Indian government. They were, in fact, actively harboring, exploiting the system which is there in Canada, and they were trying to utilize those loopholes and a complete oblivion, or rather, complete detached actions by the Canadian government, which made them very, very strong vis-a-vis the Canadian establishment is concerned. And this is the reason why the government of India has been bringing the role and the kind of role these extremist organizations have been playing in fomenting terror in India and outside world. But the Canadian government did not pay any heed to it.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us and sharing your input on this story. I'm also being joined by Daniel Boardman, Canadian journalist, on this story. Now, Daniel, you have also been saying this all along that Khalistani groups in Canada receive support from the government. New Delhi has been raising these concerns. And now the government of Canada also admitting the same in this report. Walk us through the details of this report.
Well, yeah, I mean, this report is highly vindicating for me. You see that, yes, we are domestically funding terrorism. Now, I'm gonna kind of correct a bit what's going on here. I mean, the Indian narrative tends to be that, oh, Canada is doing this to undermine us. It's part of some grand strategy to undermine India. That's fundamentally ridiculous. There is no grand strategy here. We're just funding terrorism. It's not my terrorist, your terrorist, like you were saying. We're funding all terrorism. We have an auto theft industry. Part of the report is, I feel vindicated on this part as well. I've been talking about this. But Canada is $1 billion auto theft industry. So this is people stealing our cars. And the auto theft industry, as I'm saying, and I've been vindicated here, primarily funds Hezbollah. Okay, so that's a listed terrorist organization here. More of a problem for Canada than India. We have multiple front groups funding Hamas. Fundraising for Hamas is massive throughout Canada, throughout the mosque system, throughout the NGOs. The Muslim Brotherhood is incredibly strong in Canada. And yes, the Khalistanis as well. This is where I hope India realizes what the problems are in the West. Again, my criticism of India tends to be they think the West is playing this underground super D, like 4D chess to undermine India with some grand strategy. and they're not. This is a fundamental collapse of our values, and we're not targeting India. We're just utterly, incompetent when it comes to all terror financing. And India is one of the countries that suffers the most from terrorism and different radical terrorist groups of multiple persuasions. I mean, it's not just Khalistani, it's not just Islamists. You have Naxalites as well, far left terrorists. Every type of terrorism affects India. So when you have countries like Canada, which let their citizens just fundraise for terrorism, this creates massive problems. And if I were to say what it boils down to, it's a lot of cowardice. We know this is going on, but people in the West are so afraid to be called, racist, sexist, Islamophobic, anti-Sikh, anti-this, anti-that, anti-whatever, that we just let registered terrorist organizations and just openly fundraise in our country because everyone's too afraid to do anything about it. And that includes our intelligence agents, which are utterly incompetent. And I mean, our grand intelligence agency, CSIS, has no domestic operational mandate. So they literally can't do anything domestically. So they play it off to the RCMP, and the RCMP, which has a domestic mandate, says, oh, it's foreign terrorism that's connected. So it's not in our mandate, it's the CSIS. So everyone's just either, utterly corrupt or finding excuses to do nothing. And this is the Canadian system. So yes, I feel like the Indians are vindicated by this report. Canada is financing Khalistani-backed extremism against India. I feel also vindicated because we're also funding Hamas, Hezbollah, every PFLP, you name it. If it's a terrorist group, we're funding it in Canada openly, and often with tax receipts for the terrorists as well. So if I were to advise the Indians on one thing, I would say, don't think this is some grand conspiracy against India where master manipulators are pulling some plan to undermine. No, it's simply incompetence, in cowardice, and the fundamental collapse of our values. So yes, the report details, Khalistani funding, Hezbollah funding, Hamas funding, and the interesting is, I mean, a lot of it sometimes is done with a tax receipt, and the other parts of it are done with outright criminality, like the multi-billion-dollar car theft industry, which ran through Canada for years.
All right, Daniel. So from what you just said, it seems like a grand strategy on the part of the government to support such groups. In fact, not just, as you mentioned, Khalistani groups, but also Hamas as well.
There is no grand strategy. There's no strategy here.
It's just incompetence is what you're saying.
It's pure incompetence and cowardice. There is no strategy. There is no strategy. I know these people. They are not strategic people. They are not thinking. They don't know what India is, where it is, what Khalistan is. No strategy whatsoever.